Transmitter device activated. Coordinates set for Earth 2.
Hello and welcome to the Earth 2 podcast, the show that navigates the pre-crisis DC Comics multiverse and celebrates the legacy of their Golden Age characters throughout the Silver and Bronze Ages of comics. I'm Steve Higgins.
And I'm David Steele. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. This is the first episode I've recorded in ages, listeners. We built up quite a backlog in advance of the Seven Soldiers of Victory episodes coming out, so this is the first time Steve and I have recorded in nearly 2 months. And at the point of recording, the last 2 episodes that Steve and I recorded haven't even been released yet.
Yeah, you have had quite a backlog, and I've been enjoying every episode.
Good, thank you kindly.
The one that just was released was The Man Who Created Superman, and my daughter and I are loving it, so yeah, keep up the good work, guys.
Thanks, man. It's nice to have you back. It gives Peter a week off. Peter, as we speak, is currently editing the Seven Soldiers saga, which you'll probably all have heard by now, listeners. Yeah, I had a little snippet the other day of part of the first episode, so it was a lot of fun hearing everyone back, playing their characters and hearing everyone converse with each other. You all absolutely nailed it, so thank you. I'll never be able to read a Star Spangled Kid and Stripesy story ever again without thinking of, first of all, Luke Wilson, but second of all, the idea that the Star Spangled Kid was stoned out of his head for the entirety of it. But anyway, so thank you, Brandon. Yes, so, listeners, what Steve and I are going to talk about this week? Well, Steve and I are going to be reading a comic that was published very soon after my second birthday in March 1975. But before we get to it, Steve and I are going to take a quick trip forward in time and backwards in time at the same time to March 1999. Steve, where were you and what was going on with you in March 1999?
March of 1999, I was in my senior year, my final year of college, university, whatever you want to say. I would have been student teaching to earn my bachelor's. The plan at the time was to be a high school English teacher. And I knew, though, at that point that I was going to go back to grad school to get my master's. My wife and I were dating, and she still had 2 more years of college herself. And so my plan was to get my master's while she was getting her bachelor's and finishing up. So, yeah, it was the end of my final year of my undergraduate years of college.
Excellent. I was at HMV Argyle Street. I hadn't even been there a year yet at that point. I probably would have been kicking about with Damien and Rachel and going to the pub with them every other Friday or whatever. I remember, because I remember everything, listeners, March 1999 was the only time that I went up to Aberdeen to visit my sister at uni. I had a week off in March, obviously at my birthday, or just after my birthday. And while I was up there, we watched The Curse of Fatal Death, the Comic Relief Doctor Who special, when it went out. And I met some of Alison's uni pals and stuff. And if memory serves, I think I got my copy of Phantom Stranger issue 4 when I was up in Aberdeen, which is the one illustrated by Neil Adams, which completed my run of Phantom Stranger. I had a complete run of Phantom Stranger at 26. That's not bad, is it? So why are we talking about March 1999, listeners? Well, you might have worked it out. You might have guessed. You might be aware. March 1999 was when DC Comics, to the great delight of people like me, published an event called The Justice Society Returns. Do you remember that event being published, our Steve?
I do. I was very deep into my Starman fandom at that point, of course.
Yes.
And I remember hearing that James Robinson was going to be writing this story that kind of went back to the Justice Society era of the 40s, and that it was going to be bookended with single issues from one series, but in between would be separate issues of adventure comics and Star Spangled comics and so on. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. I gotta check that out.
Yeah.
And I think I probably would have told my comic shop owner, Ken Murphy. I was shopping at Marvels and Legends Comics at the time. And actually even occasionally working there on a Sunday.
Cool.
Whenever he was busy, I would come man the till for him for a couple hours in the afternoon, but paid under the table in comic books, essentially.
Yeah. No, I remember it very well. But as you say, it started, there was 2, the whole thing was, I believe, spearheaded by Peter Tomasi, who, from what I understand, what I've read since, had sort of said, right, why are we not using the JSA? Because at this point, the JLA series was very successful. And obviously the Justice Society being the original team. So what they did, listeners, you probably know this if you're an Earth 2 podcast listener, but you won't mind me telling you again. There were 2 issues of All-Star Comics. Issue 1 published on the 17th of March, 1999. And then the following week, as Steve mentioned a couple of them there, we got issues of new number 1s of Adventure Comics, Thrilling Comics, All-American Comics, National Comics, Star Spangled Comics, Smash Comics, Sensation Comics. And then on the 31st of March, we got All-Star Comics issue 2, which tied it all up. These were all cover dated in May 1999. This was a glorious series because amongst all this, there was, as Steve said, there was James Robinson's issue of Adventure Comics, which tied in really closely to what he was doing with Starman, all to do with Ted Knight's involvement in the Manhattan Project, and it sowed the seeds of the Atom's sort of nuclear-powered punch coming along and all this sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There was a brilliant issue of National Comics by Mark Waid, which featured Jay Garrick, the Golden Age Flash, and Mr. Terrific. And this came out about 5 or 6 weeks after I got my Fair Play tattoo, so that I was very happy with this comic. I read this comic to death. I was very moved by it, and responded to it really in a very quixotic type way. There was the issue of Star Spangled Comics with the Star Spangled Kid and Stripesy and Sandman and Sandy, which I think we might have mentioned earlier in the year, kind of alluded to Sandy's fate in the future, when he'd be transformed into a giant monster. There was Tom Pyre's excellent Our Man and Dr. Midnight story, which continued to do wonderful stuff with Our Man, which he had just started doing in his own Our Man series. Yeah, amongst others, there was Sensation Comics, and there was was it Thrilling Comics, which had Wildcat and Hawkman, I think so. All American with Johnny Thunder and Green Lantern, written by Ron Mars, who was writing Green Lantern at that time, and beautifully illustrated by Eduardo Barreto. But then, of course, it all finished up in All-Star Comics issue 2. So why are we talking about this event, listeners? Well, because, as you probably know if you were there at the time, the baddie in The Justice Society Returns was a character called Stalker, which is why today Steve and I are going to read issue 1 of Stalker, which was published on the 11th of March 1975, and we'll jump straight into it, and Steve is going to tell us all about the cover.
All right, so on the upper left we have the DC Bullet, the line of DC Superstars, and on the right we have the circle for the 25 cents, number 1, cover date of July. In between those, at the very top, we have first sensational issue banner, Beware the Man with a Stolen Soul, Stalker. I love the Stalker logo, and I love, in fact, that in each issue of it, they changed the color scheme of it.
Yeah.
On this first issue, it is like a purple banner in the background and pink lettering, magenta, maybe you might say, lettering of the word Stalker. Of course, approved by the Comics Code Authority. And in the image, front and center, we have Stalker himself, and he is wearing his green tunic, under which there's like a orange bodysuit that looks like kind of chainmail, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And his green boots. This is a Ditko story, and in some ways, he kind of reminds me of the Creeper.
Oh, yeah.
Ditko's drawings of the Creeper.
I can see that. Yeah, that's a good... Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very insightful. No, I'm not being sarcastic. No, genuinely. If you were to squint and just maybe imagine his silhouette, it's very easy to see the Creeper there. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Especially the sleeves, because the tunic sleeves are all kind of sprawled out the way the Creeper's got that fur ruff or whatever it is around his shoulders.
Yeah, Steve and I are both miming the Creeper's shoulders for the benefit of our YouTube viewers.
And he is posed, leaning forward, holding in his right hand the hilt of a sword, and he is lightly touching, I hope he's not tightly gripping the blade with the other hand, holding it forward, because looming towards him is some kind of monstrous figure that we see the shadow of only. It's almost as if it's from the point of view of this demonic creature that is coming at him, and we can see the shadow on the wall, and it's clearly hulking and large and carrying bladed weapons in both hands, and the blade in one hand it's got a curved hilt to it and is short, and the other blade is quite long. And he's standing on the steps of what looks to be sort of like a temple of some kind. And on each side of where he is standing is this plinth that looks like a hand holding a dagger. One hand on one side is the right hand, and one side is the left hand. It's like a warrior coming at you.
Yes, Steve and I are both miming holding
Again,
daggers
we're miming.
for the benefits of our YouTube viewers.
And down at the bottom, it tells us the title of this issue is Beginning an Unholy Quest for a Stolen Soul.
Marvellous. So, without any further ado, we shall leap in. As we go along, listeners, there's quite a lot of CBC captioning, and there's also points where the caption kind of runs over the action and vice versa, so we'll do our best to kind of strike a balance with this. But we begin. We can see an armoured guard standing with his back to us at the turret on the top of a castle. Clearly there's a blazing torch beside him, and we can see in the foreground a rope has been slung over this parapet, and we can see a hand pulling itself up the rope. In the second panel, we can see the figure that Steve described so well there, just from the cover, pulling himself up the side of the castle, using this rope with a dagger in his mouth, and the captioning begins.
Night winds carry the calm of silence across the walls of Castle Loran, reassuring those within that they remain masters of their destiny, and more, masters of their land. But tonight, the night winds speak false.
And then in the larger panel, we see Stalker leaping over the parapet with his knife in his hand as the guard, who's holding a pike, whirls at his approach. The captioning continues.
A frigid aura betrays his forgotten birth in the cold wastes, but whispered myths claim that he was spawned in hellfire. Damned by his own choosing, he dared challenge the Lord of Demons himself. Fear was his tool, and death his weapon, and none among the living wished to encounter the nameless man called Stalker.
And then we get another caption on part of the parapet at the bottom that reads,
A Saga of Sword and Sorcery by Paul Levitz, writer, Steve Ditko and Wally Wood, artists, Joe Orlando, editor.
In the first panel of the big double spread that runs across pages 2 and 3, we see Stalker taking out the poor guard, presumably by stabbing him and then withdrawing his dagger very quickly. The captioning picks up again.
A door, it is said, is only as secure as the man who guards it. But how does a man guard against death?
Yes, well, we've said goodbye to that guard already as Stalker opens the door, makes his way down into the castle.
The raucous babble of the dining hall below fills the air, but does not reach Stalker's ears.
And we see Stalker going down a small spiral staircase. We can see the banquet hall underneath him. Lots of people sat at the table, raising their glasses, having a really good time.
Instead, he absorbs the essence of the room, judging its distances, calculating its angles, and choosing the precisely perfect weapon for the throw.
Stalker is holding a dagger in his right hand and a rolled-up scroll in his left hand. And then, as Steve had said, the throw. There's a zip sound effect as Stalker hurls the dagger down into the banqueting hall. And we see the wide spread of the room, lots of people in medieval-style clothing sat around this massive table with plates and cups in front of them. And at the head of them all is what I can only describe her as what looks like an old-school classic Disney animated evil stepmother. Do you think that's fair?
Yes, very fair. It's got very much like a headdress there that reminds me of a character from a Disney film.
Yeah, I mean, she's kind of like the wicked stepmother from Sleeping Beauty or something or other, but we can see this woman wearing a deep-cut white dress, white gown, you might say. She's a purple cloak, cape, secured with clasps at her neck. She's a sort of blue headdress with a golden crown that has points that curl up and in, almost like flames, actually. She's wearing gloves. She sat at the head of all of this with a cup in her hand, enjoying the wine, unbeknownst to her, the knife flying towards her. The captioning continues.
The opening blow has been struck. A war that will rend a world from its gods has begun. An unholy Armageddon brought about by one man's quest for a stolen soul.
The final panel of page 3, there's a thwack sound effect as the dagger hurled by Stalker, and we can see that the scroll has been tied around the handle of the dagger, impacts into the back of the throne this lady in white is sitting in. It's narrowly missed her head. We can see her luscious lips and her wide, gorgeous eyes. Oh my goodness me, she's devastating. The caption for the first panel of page 4.
The sounds of fear fill the room, but one figure stands unbowed by terror.
Pandemonium ensues. We can see everyone, all the guards and all the guests sort of standing up, the guards pulling their swords and everyone looking very frightened as the lady in white stands up and yells, "Guards! The assassin must still be near. Find him and bring me his head. He'll pay a high price for having missed." We can see her pulling the dagger out of the back of the chair and opening up the scroll that was tied to the handle, and she reads it. We can see her wide-eyed, and she's saying, I cannot believe it! By Wiggoth and all the demons of his realm, no man alive would dare to do this! And we can see the note that she's reading. It has been written by Stalker, and it goes like this.
Baroness, once you offered me guest right, and gave only pain. Then you promised title, and gave but torture. Now I wish to pay my debt, the pain to be paid a year and a day hence, with your death. The torture I collect whilst you wait my return. Stalker.
Yep, signed by Stalker. Gosh, we then get a close-up of Stalker, and we can see that his eyes glow a bright pink. when a caption reads,
"Perhaps it was on this night legend first named Stalker demon, for surely no mortal would perform such a hellish feat. But a score of years before there was no doubt of the obvious and pitiful mortality of the child, whom myth has demonized."
Yes, and we round out page 4 with a rippled flashback panel which shows a small boy, I would say probably about 5 or 6, maybe younger, in tattered brown trousers and a tattered white shirt, being kicked out of a building by a large burly man with thick dark hair wearing a brown shirt, blue trousers, brown boots, and as he kicks out the child he says,
"Out, whelp! It's time you stopped feeding off me and fended for yourself."
The little boy cries,
But, Don't call me that. I've told you before, I've no claim on you or you on me.
There's a caption then for the first panel on page 5.
It was a childhood spent in starvation, hunting and fighting for every morsel.
Yes, we see the little boy who looks a little bit older, still wearing tattered clothes, and he's got a stick which he's using to fight off dogs who are trying to grab what little piece of food he has in his left hand. We can see he's obviously sort of scavenged it from a rubbish tip or something, and the dogs look skinny and nasty and very hungry, and he's obviously fighting for his life. Caption continues.
Then came the years in the cold wastes, hopelessly battling for the treasured refuse of caravans traveling the frozen desert.
Yes, we see the silhouetted forms of what look like camels to my eyes making their way through the desert with people walking along, and behind them, fighting off large, what look like cross between seagulls and eagles, large birds that are obviously trying to pick at what's left behind by the caravan. We can see the little boy flinging his stick around to try and scare them away so he can try and eat for himself.
But there were also somewhat better times, for as Babe became man, he learned how to care for himself and avoid unwanted attention from others.
We see the child obviously in the process of trying to either sneak into or out of a building. We can see presumably the owner of the building silhouetted, shake their fist at him, and then the final panel, page 5, the boy hiding under cover. He's got a goose or a duck or something in his arms as a soldier, very thickly built soldier bearing a sword, stands over him, obviously searching for him because the boy's obviously stolen this goose or duck. So yes, it's all about him struggling to survive and feed himself as he goes up. We arrive at the top of page 6.
And with better times came dreams of better worlds, visions of knighthood and castles and armor dancing in a youth's mind.
Yes, we see the boy asleep. There's a bowl with a spoon in his right hand, and as he dreams we can see visions of himself looking a lot stronger, fighting with a sword against other swords, and with a maiden wrapping her arms around his waist as he tries to fight off a scary-looking dragon.
Until the day when there was a chance to make the dreams come true.
We see the Baroness, who we met earlier in the story, being carried along the city streets, and we should emphasise the medieval, Middle-earth type stylings of it all. She's been carried along by 4 men, reclining gracefully, and the little boy, who we've been with so far, sees her, and he moves towards her thinking,
"This is it. If I'm ever going to do it, now is the time."
And as he breaks through towards her, the caption reads,
Suddenly the crowd gasped in awe as the youth in their midst dared the unthinkable.
And as the boy stands before the Baroness, she says, "What do you think you are doing, child? Speak quickly and well, or your father will have one less squalling mouth to feed."
"If my words do not please you, your ladyship, my life is a fair forfeit, as I have spent it preparing to say them. I would serve you, my lady, and learn the noble art of warfare to guard your honor in all ways. I beg the chance, being a beggar lad, and freely offer all that I might give. My life."
The Baroness looks sceptical. A finger to her brow, she says, "But what of your parents, little one? Surely they do not approve of this."
"If ever I had family, I remember them not, and care less. I bear no name, and will take none till the day I am given leave to fight in someone's service."
The Baroness looks as though she's laughing at all this, and she says, "Oh, you shall have your chance, O nameless warrior to be. There is always room for one more at Castle Loranth." And then she thinks in close-up, "Especially for one more slave." There's a slow dissolve. We see the boy standing in front of the Baroness's castle. We can see her being carried in front of him. The captioning reads,
"Night winds whisper songs of treachery to those who will listen as they slip through the trees. But there is one who cannot listen, for he dares not. For if he did, he'd learn that dreams are oft spun for naught. But even dreamers can only deny the truth for so long. Eventually, shining castles lose their glitter, and a hopeful knight-errant learns that he is but an erring serf."
Yes, and there's a nice montage image of the boy scrubbing the floors and carrying barrels around and serving food for others and cowering from the cold in a corner of a room without any proper bed or anything like that. It all looks very grim, very sad.
And when illusions fade, reality must be dealt with.
And we see the boy, obviously in the kitchens of the castle, doing his chores. We can see some pigs standing around and the Baroness sweeping past imperiously. The boy sees her and thinks,
A year wasted with this broom in hand instead of a sword. That witch would have me spend the rest of my days tending her animals. I'll not have it. I'll be a warrior, not a whelp.
And with that, he slams his broom into the wall, snapping off the brush at the top and leaving just the broken stick underneath. He walks towards the Baroness, saying,
Your ladyship, I would fain have a word with you.
Back to your kennel, slave. You have naught to say to me. The boy confronts her, the next panel dropping his stick, saying,
But I have, my lady, for I am not here as slave born, but as promise bound. I offered to serve you, but as knight, not serf.
Think you it matters, fool? You are my creature, to do with as I will. We can see in the background an armoured and helmeted figure, with a mask covering the left side of his face. The Baroness calls to him, saying, Slave master, come hither. One of your pups needs a whipping. The final panel, page 8, the slave master walks the boy off as the Baroness looks on. The slave master saying, You'll soon learn to respect your masters. Pain is a good teacher. You can see he's got a whip in his left hand. This does not look good.
And so,
There's another guard looking on in the background. The boy standing defenceless. The slave master starts to coil and wave his whip around, taunting the little boy as he says, We'll see how fast your manners improve.
best practice that which you teach. It's not nice to point, especially with a whip.
And as the whip coils around the boy's right arm, he grabs hold of the length of it with his left arm, pulling the slave master off balance, rushing forward and striking him in the face with his right hand. The slave master rubs his face, saying, You've just made your punishment worse, whelp. And the other guard who was there pulls a dagger, saying,
It's your blood we'll have now.
The boy uncoils the whip from around his arm, saying,
Go on thinking that, friend. You have your dreams, and I have mine.
And with that, the boy leaps out of the window that he's standing beside. The dagger that the other guard had poised follows him, misses him, and page 9 concludes with the boy diving into the moat that surrounds the castle. There's no splash sound effect, but we can see the ripples, and it looks very nice.
Very much in the style of Peter Capaldi and Heaven Sent. Makes me wonder if there's a pile of skulls down there in the bottom of that moat.
I understood that reference. I remember actually really enjoying that episode, more so than many others in the first couple of years of Capaldi's era, but that's a conversation for another time. We arrive at the top of page 10, and actually, after just alluding to Doctor Who, it's quite amusing that the caption reads,
Full circle. A week's walk has brought the youth back to Geranth, the city in the cold wastes where he was born. But as surely as a circle ends, it begins anew.
Yes, we see the boy, tousled haired and torn clothed, walking amongst the other people in the city, and they've all got weird helmets or headdresses and very fancy robes, and there's strange tall buildings with weird decorations on them, one which seems to have a lightning bolt, one which seems to have flames coming out the top, one that seems to, at first I thought it was a full moon balanced on top of it. There's also a statue of a lady holding up a love heart which is on fire, which is a bit emo and a bit goth if you ask me. And as he makes his way through all of this stuff, the boy is thinking,
Ha! 1,000 gods, each as omnipotent as the next. Not a one's brought me but ill. Still, I suppose I've never tried, and if warrior I wish to be, then I should offer my prayer to the demon lord of warriors, de Girth.
yes, and we see him approaching what looks like a temple. Carved on the outside was a skull wearing a kind of soldier's helmet balanced against a shield with crossed swords behind it, and very similar to actually what's going on the cover. Hands holding up very sharp daggers, all of this surrounding the doorway at the top of a flight of steps, and the boy walks through, and then we see him walking further in, and there are other giant swords sticking out the floor and giant hands holding daggers, and there's a big shield on the wall, and he's walking up to a brazier which he lights, and as the flames start to glow and burn, he clenches his fists and thinks,
What a warrior I would be if...
No, lad. Say instead what a warrior you will be in my service.
As the boy recoils from the brazier, a massive armoured figure appears to be forming in front of him. Sort of red chainmail, purpley pink, as Steve said earlier, magenta is probably the best colour for it. Spikes all down the sleeves of this jerkin that he's wearing. He's magenta coloured gloves with spikes sticking off them. He has a big armoured helmet with magenta horns. The helmet's obviously metal, and there's obviously a faceplate covering the aspect of this fellow who's just arrived. We don't see any features through the eyelets or the mouth holes, but just a burning bright yellow. And as the boy recoils, this new arrival says,
I'll grant you power, skill, all the arts of killing men ever wished for. You'll become the living messenger of death, the most invincible foe this world has known.
And the boy, with a manic look in his eye, clenches his fists and yells,
Demon Lord de Girth, you know I'd give my life for a taste of such power.
De Girth gets a close-up as he says,
I am not here to take your life. I wish to give you a new one. I give you the art of combat. With all its skills, no form of fighting man-to-man is beyond you any longer.
And we see the boy now wearing the green and gold armour and tunic combo that Steve described in the cover and we saw him wearing at the start of the story. See him fighting a couple of soldiers, flipping one over his shoulders. He does a backhand and sends another one flying. De Girth continues,
I bestow the eye of a marksman with any weapon.
And we get an image of the boy in his armour firing a crossbow. De Girth continues once more,
And I grant you the gift of the hunter, to follow any trail undiscovered and unhampered.
and we see this is a great shot. It's kind of from above, we're very high up. The boy's balancing along a beam, looking down at an armoured and cloaked figure with a sword drawn who's walking underneath him.
From that I give you your name, Stalker, and ask you if you will hunt for those I seek, and kill those I doom.
The boy, looking up at the brazier that De Girth is burning in the heart of, and he says,
Ask of me what you will. I'll pay any price you name.
De Girth points and says,
Even your immortal soul?
Granted. I'll not need it when I'm dead anyway.
You do not understand, Stalker. My gifts are yours now, and my price is mine.
And De Girth sort of gestures with his fist, and the boy falls back as a sort of white and pink aura seems to pull up and flow out of him towards De Girth. The caption continues,
Legend claims he grew up alone, without ever a person to share his thoughts, his hopes, his dreams. Perhaps then he should have understood loneliness and the pain it brings. But no man can understand how alone he is now, for no one alive has ever suffered his loss. No one alive has ever lost their soul before.
And the boy starts to rise up from the ground, pulling himself up, and we see that his eyes now grow a bright magenta pink. At the top of page 14, we're back in the castle, where we were at the start of the story after he threw the dagger. The captioning reads,
Power. Bought for a price not yet understood. It filled Stalker's mind with thoughts of revenge, thoughts that brought him back to Castle Loranth this night.
And we see Stalker looking stronger and a bit older than we did in the flashbacks there. Hold on to a rope line, looking down into the banqueting hall, seeing the Baroness directing all the guards as they rush about, and he's thinking,
Ha! My message worked perfectly. She's so scared, this next year will be torture for her. Then I'll collect my due.
And with that, Stalker swings down on his line. But we see the shadow falling behind him of someone who's spotted him, who says, Stop running, dog. You'll be dead long before you can escape. And a sword weaves into view, prompting Stalker to pull his own blade and say,
You!
And we see revealed it's the slave master who taunted him earlier on with the whip. And he says, Aye, and ready to finish what I started. They start to cross swords, a couple of clanks as they start fighting. Stalker says,
You're not fighting an infant any longer, child beater. Think you can stand the strain?
The sword fights continue into page 15 until Stalker forces the slave master back against the wall, saying,
You see, old man, we're on even terms now. Or maybe not.
And with that, he manages to parry the sword out of the slave master's hand. The slave master looks panicked and he says, You've learned a sword trick or two, that's all. I can still kill you with my bare hands.
Ah, but I can stop you with my bare feet.
And with that, Stalker throws down his sword, throws himself onto his back, grabbing hold of the wrists of the slave master. He sticks his feet into the slave master's belly and flips him over the parapet, so he falls down into the banqueting hall, screaming as he goes. Yeah! He lands, breaking the table in front of the Baroness and her guests, and the Baroness exclaims, Wigarth, even my most faithful servant can no longer protect me.
Confusion reigns, and Stalker escapes, untroubled by his foes, but bothered by his thoughts.
Yes, we see Stalker using his rope line to descend from the castle, thinking,
Here I've begun my revenge, tasted a foe's blood for the first time, and it all feels hollow. No joy, no relief, no victory.
In fact, he lands on the back of a horse, starts to ride off through the weird landscape, thinking,
'Tis as if I had no more emotions than a stone. This is not what I agreed to.
A slow dissolve.
A short, hard ride takes Stalker from the castle to Loranth town and Degurth's local shrine and into the fabric of legend.
Yeah, we see Stalker and his horse. I'll probably put this panel on the socials, actually, listeners, because it's very fancy. We see him riding into what looks like a town square, and we can see another temple, which is a big sword and a skull outside it. Presumably that must be the local shrine the caption spoke of. Oh, look, it's another DC house ad for the Bible tabloid and the All-Star Comics #3 tabloid, which I think I shared a couple of weeks ago when we did Action Comics. Anyway, top of page 17. Stalker has presumably entered the temple. There's a massive fire pit burning with a huge sword laying on the floor and stretched across the fire pit, so it offers almost like a bridge across it. And standing in this fire pit is an older man, long white beard, wearing a weird robe with a sort of shield design on it, which almost looks a bit like Digger's silhouette. He's a hat with a little detail on it, and he's wearing a couple of wooden staffs as Stalker walks towards him. And Stalker says,
Priest, I would speak with your master.
Ah, but Master Stalker, then you would speak with yourself.
Play no word games with me. Where is Degurth?
In truth, I know not. He has commanded me to aid you, but I cannot say what. I do not know. He throws one of the staffs towards Stalker, who catches it, as the priest says, But here, take this. 'Twill make balancing easier.
Worry not about my balance. Fear for yours, if you do not answer me.
And there's a crack as Stalker tries to strike the old man, but the old man parries with his own staff, saying, The only one of our order who knows the gateway to Digger's realm is Flan, the prior of the temple at World's End Sea. Our point of view shifts in the first panel of page 18. We're looking down over the burning fire pit, burning bright red, golden flames all around. The Stalker says,
And you? You cannot reach your lord?
It is impossible. They parry close to each other. You see the flames casting a golden glow as Stalker says,
Then know that Degurth bargained falsely. I have been stripped of my feelings, torn from my humanity. I will not live like this.
What has this to do with me? I cannot help you. I will see the door to hell only one time, when I enter it for eternity.
Very well, then. When you get there, tell Degurth he has something that belongs to me, and I'm coming to get it back.
And with that, Stalker knocks the priest's staff out of his hand and strikes him so that he falls off the sword bridge down into the fire pit with a scream. Yeah! The final panel. Silhouetted form of Stalker riding his horse through a barren desert. And take a couple of drinks, listeners, because 2 large full moons hang in the sky above him. And a concluding caption reads,
Next, Darkling Death at World's End Sea.
And another caption reads,
Next issue on sale, second week in May.
Now, the next 3 issues, Steve and I both read them quickly in preparation, deal with Stalker's sort of quest to try and get hold of Degurth, and at the end of issue 4, Stalker confronting Degurth about trying to get his soul back. Degurth refuses, and all of that sort of stuff, saying,
I am an elder god, Stalker, and we live on the power of belief. Your soul, your token of belief, is now a part of me for eternity. I can no more return your soul than give life to the dead. As long as I exist, it will be mine. And I shall exist until not a single mortal believes in me, for that is when even gods must die. But join me as my servant, and learn the pleasures of the damned.
Holding out a hand to Stalker there, but Stalker picks up his sword, saying,
No! I will have my soul back, Degurth. And if it means slaying a god, then that is what I shall do. Return me to my world, and the army of the dead shall rest in their graves once more. And I shall devote my life to your death. Let those who worship you beware, for they have not long to live.
Very well, Stalker. Return from whence you came and begin your task. Slay all who serve me before they slay you. For if it is you who dies, you will be damned and in my power. And I promise you, the most painful damnation in the eons-long history of hell.
And he laughs, and we see Stalker being returned to his own world after a whole host of dimension hopping. And then issue 4, which is the final issue of the series, concludes with Stalker raising his sword to the heavens, his pink eyes flaring as he yells,
Degurth, I accept your challenge. I shall do the impossible and banish evil from this world. My soul shall yet be mine.
And that basically more or less leads into All-Star Comics #1, which is a wonderful double-page spread where Dr. Occult recaps Stalker's origin, how he came to give his soul up to Dagurth, and how he confronts him. I should not attempt a Dr. Occult voice, but I should read the captioning for this page in issue 1 of All-Star Comics. He fought Dagurth to reclaim his soul, but learned the only way he could win was to defeat the thing that fed the demon's power. War. Now that's not quite exactly what happened at the end of issue 4. So began Stalker's quest, an end to war, an impossible never-ending existence, bereft of a soul, stripped of his feelings, torn from humanity, utterly alone. And perhaps he deserved his fate. He was, after all, a man damned by his own choosing. It didn't take long, no more than 3 centuries, for Stalker's dark existence to take its toll. Madness settled upon him. Yet it was only then that his solution became clear. War and its evils are inherent in all sentient beings, intelligent life. Eliminate life, and you eliminate war. And so it has been from then to this day, the one without a soul, travelling from world to world, dimension to dimension, stalking life, ending life, stalking life, ending life. And then it cuts back to the JSA and Green Lantern putting Dr. Occult to sleep. So basically, poor Stalker, as we've read, was sort of damned into this eternal quest of trying to stop all war, which of course is what leads him to Earth during World War II, and the Justice Society returns at events. So what I'm probably going to do in the socials this week, listeners, I will pull out and post a few of the better panels of Stalker combating the JSA from the pages of the Justice Society Returns story. I think that's worth sharing. And as I said at the top, obviously, our main reason for doing Stalker issue 1 is because he's involved in the Justice Society Returns, but Steve's now going to read us the text page from issue 2 of Stalker, which further gives us some justification.
So the letters page for Stalker is called The Sword and the Soul, and the part that I am reading now is subtitled Stalker's World. Question number 1 in any sword and sorcery mag is whether to set your hero on Earth or in an alternate universe. We chose to move Stalker into an alternate cosmos because of the extra freedom it allows. Sharp-eyed readers spotted that last issue when our closing panel featured Stalker riding off into the moonrise with 2 moons in the sky. As for the geographical differences we're planning to exploit, this issue should give you the first clue. Stalker's been fighting his latest battle on one of the islands in the World's End Sea. Many primitive races believe that the world is flat, and that there's a definite edge where the sea spills over. On Stalker's world, that's true. About 100 feet past the last of the islands, there's a sort of waterfall with no end in sight. And just beyond that is the incredible void of space. In all probability, such a world would have to be very small and composed of very dense elements to have the necessary mass, to have enough gravity to hold the atmosphere. But in a universe of infinite possibilities, no doubt there is a world much like this one.
So there you go, listeners. Not only was he the bad guy in a big JSA crossover that returned him to prominence, he was in another dimension. So there we go. So, Steve, what did you think of Stalker?
I really enjoyed it. I am not the biggest sword and sorcery fan, which is kind of funny because in my own comic writing endeavors, one story that I'm getting a lot of fun out of writing right now is a sword and sorcery kind of story. So that's kind of interesting. One of my collaborators and I are kind of creating our own little world, much like Stalker. But yeah, I really, really dug it. The character and his motivation, you can really understand it. And I love the art in it.
Yeah.
It's clearly Ditko. You can see his evolution. Like if you compare this to his Spider-Man stuff or Doctor Strange stuff from the 60s, and then if you compare this to, like, say, Speedball in the 90s, you can see the through line. You can see how he got from that to here to eventually moving forward to that. And I like this part of his art almost better than either of those other extremes.
Sure. That's interesting. I have to say I'm not a Ditko fan at all. I can appreciate it. I enjoy reading his Spider-Man stories, but I think certainly in the Spider-Man sort of era and the Doctor Strange sort of era, it's maybe fair to describe him more as a cartoonist than a comic artist. I do not mean to proclaim sacrilege or anything, listeners, so don't come hunting for me with flaming torches. I think Wally Wood as the inker probably had a great impact on this as well, because I really enjoyed it too. I really enjoyed the artwork.
Yeah.
Read the other issues in preparation before we started recording, and I really enjoyed the whole thing. The first 4 issues really do feel like a chapter 1. And they say as much on the text pages. They're sort of speculating through the text pages for the series that it all depends on sales, how far they're going to get and all that. And it's lucky that they managed to even, because how many series have we read that have just stopped dead, without a conclusion? And these 4 issues very much have a complete sort of chapter 1 sort of feel to them.
Yes, definitely.
And they say as much on the letters page of issue 4 that, I think they say something like, in case we're not back next month or in
Right.
2 months' time. Yeah, so cheers to everyone that supported us. So I think they knew they were maybe kind of winging it as it went along. But I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it. It's really, really clear. There's quite a lot of unnecessary say what you see captioning, but it's not too bad. And I think it is. I mean, I'm not a sword and sorcery fan either.
Mm-hmm.
As far as it goes, the only Conan comics I own are like Assistant Editors Month issues and Marvel 25th Anniversary issues, or I've got one with a Neil Adams cover. I don't care for the Tolkien stuff. I've not seen a single episode of Game of Thrones. That whole type of fantasy isn't really my bag. The closest I come to all that, I suppose, is the Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff, but that is a science fiction sort of adventure sort of bait to it, rather than out-and-out fantasy, in inverted commas. But I enjoyed this. It was fascinating. I'm not sure when I read Justice Society Returns if I knew that Stalker had actually existed as a character, separately. But my copy of issue 1 has a City Centre Comics backing board on it, which means I probably would have bought it from Pete Root fairly soon after. Or maybe I'd seen it in back issue bins already and hadn't really registered, but then I read Justice Society Returns and thought, all right, I'm interested, I want to find out a bit more of this. There was actually something you said in preparation about the Doctor Occult flashback that I mentioned.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I did not know. I did not know that Robinson and Goyer didn't create Stalker. When I read this in 99, I don't know if Stalker got a who's who in the DC Universe entry or not.
Right.
If he had, I might have read that, but if he didn't, then I would never have known.
Right.
And so then reading the Stalker issues and then going back and rereading Justice Society Returns, and in particular All-Star Comics 1, the panels that are on that 2-page spread, all the panels on the left page are directly lifted practically from Stalker issue 1.
Yeah.
You get the bit with him fighting the dogs in particular. I'm like, wow, that is so directly lifted. And it's interesting to see Michael Lark draw it, what was originally done by Ditko.
Yeah.
I love these panels. And it makes me wish that we had gotten these further issues of Stalker to see him fight the guy with 4 arms wielding bones against that guy's swords.
Yeah.
That looks like a cool issue. I want to see that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's a very interesting sort of way of doing it, because they hint, obviously, at some of the stuff that does happen in the Stalker series, but it's always the way in it. With these short-lived series, there always is so much potential. I enjoyed issue 1. I enjoyed reading the rest of them. It did make me feel a bit sad that there wasn't any more. One thing I want to point out, because Kenny will be listening and I know he'll be delighted when I mention it, issue 2 on the cover has the phrase World's End, which is obviously the name of part 1 of the Dalek invasion of Earth. And issue 4 features the word Inferno, which was the name of the final episode of The Romans and the final story in season 7. So there you go, Kenny. And of course we mentioned there was a caption that said full circle during the story. So there's a few Doctor Who references for you if you're listening this week, Kenny, while you're getting your steps in. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, the thing that surprised me in the preparation and the digging, because obviously we planned a long time in advance for when we're going to do these episodes, JSA Returns was not the first time that Stalker had actually come back.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there were a couple of issues of Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing 163, 164 had a story involving a character called Nightmaster who had appeared in Showcase issues 82 through to 84 in 1969. And Stalker, along with Claw the Unconquered and Starfire and a couple of other DC Sword and Sorcery characters, appeared very briefly during that sort of sequence. I've heard it said that it's kind of implied that they might be the sort of imagined by the Nightmaster character, but I haven't read those Swamp Thing stories closely enough to know, but I've seen the panels where they appear. And it's also worth pointing out that Stalker came back another couple of times. There was a Wonder Woman story called Ends of the Earth, which ran in the issues cover dated May to August 2008.
Oh.
Issues 20 through 23. Now, they're fascinating. Next time you're round, Steve, you can have a read, or maybe see if you can track them down, because not only does Stalker appear in this little story where Wonder Woman gets sent to another realm, and there's all sorts of stuff with Nemesis and Wonder Girl and Sarge Steel going on, but Claw the Unconquered pops up, and also so does the DC version of Beowulf, because Stalker wasn't the only sword and sorcery title that DC published in the 70s. There was a book entitled Sword of Sorcery, which ran through 1973. Claw the Unconquered had his own book. He was, I think, the more obvious sort of Conan rip-off. That ran, I think, up to 12 issues. There was Tor. There was a series called Starfire featuring a dark-haired lady who had nothing to do with the Teen Titan. And as I say, there was also a Beowulf series published by DC run about this time as well. And, of course, Sword of Sorcery was revived during the New 52 era which I think made it to 8 issues, mainly starring the character of Amethyst, but it also featured Stalker and Beowulf in backup strips.
Oh.
The conceit in the Stalker one, he was basically appearing in our modern world.
Huh.
So yeah, the Wonder Woman story written by Gail Simone, I'm not sure if she was aware of what happened in the JSA story, because obviously at the end of Justice Society Returns, they dispatched Stalker by hurling Our Man's hourglass at him.
Yeah.
And that sort of ages him and sends him and all that, and there's a beautiful sort of flashback to moments in Our Man's life before All-Star Comics 2 finishes with a throw forward to who the cast of the 1999 JSA series are going to be. So it's interesting that Stalker has been used a few other times outside of just the JSA, none of which I really knew before the preparation for which I did start a while ago. But so it's really interesting to find that all out. The Wonder Woman issues especially are very good if you can get a hold of them. Sword of Sorcery, New 52. I've got a couple of issues which I picked up fairly cheaply on eBay. But they were throwing so much mud at the wall during the New 52 that it's kind of it probably got lost in the storm, to be honest.
Yeah. It's
an interesting character. I think it's a great concept. I mean, I think it would have had legs. It probably could have done quite well if it had run a bit longer.
Yeah, I had no knowledge of the character. I didn't know any of that you just said. Mentioning some of those sword and sorcery characters, I do remember seeing house ads for some of those books. And I do very, very firmly remember the Claw, the Unconquered, Who's Who entry.
Oh, really?
I think that issue in particular, I must have probably read dozens of times when I was a kid.
Sure.
And I remember just being struck by the art for that one. And I remembered Starfire as well, because I'm like, Starfire, that's a different Starfire than the Russian one and then the
that
became Red Star.
Of course, I forgot about him. Yeah.
And of course, Coriander. But yeah, Stalker was never on my radar.
Yeah, I seem to remember that the female version of Starfire popped up in the Space Cabbie issue of the James Robinson Starman as well.
Oh, did she?
When they tell the story from 3 points of view and it's a different version,
yeah.
It all gets a bit Jack Kirby at one point. And Ross is still a while away from covering that one, listeners, but be sure you're listening to Opal City Confidential so you can be there when he does. Obviously, I'll put the Stalker covers on the socials this week. I'll put some panels up from issue 1, but I'll also stick up a few covers of issues of Beowulf and Claw the Unconquered and Starfire and Sword of Sorcery, just so we can, tick all the boxes. And there's a couple of house ads around this time that I'll throw up as well, so that you can get the benefits of all of that. Yeah, I feel quite sorry for Stalker overall in a way. He's kind of damned from the start,
Yeah.
Not given a chance. It would have been nice if there'd been some sort of proper redemption for him at some point, maybe, It's all very sad.
Gosh, something that instantly strikes me is in the very first pages, we get this set up that he's going to come back in a year and a day to claim his revenge on the Baroness. And might it been an interesting thing for his development if the series had more time to run, that when he did come back, perhaps he chose to spare her life or something.
Yeah, that would have been good.
But instead, we cut off at this point and Robinson and Goyer decide, let's shift him even further into villain mode. Which makes sense too.
Oh yeah, and it's a very James Robinson sort of thing to do, to take an obscure character from DC history and repurpose them and use them. He did similar stuff when he wrote The Invaders at Marvel a few years ago, when he kind of brought members of the Eternals into it and all this sort of stuff. And he likes to mix and match and play with the toy box. So as we said, Stalker had a letters page entitled The Sword and the Soul, and there are a few letters across the letters pages of issue 3 and 4 that Steve and I will now read for you now, just to give you an idea what people thought at the time. The first letter in issue 3 goes like this. Dear people, today I bought my 2 copies of Stalker number 1. The script was good, and for the basic quest/revenge direction it seems to be heading in, I'd say it was well handed. But there are a couple of problems. One is that Digurth is meant to be Satan's primordial counterpart. The similarity between the two shouldn't be played up as much. I'd like to see a brand new evilness for a new character. Also, in this setup, Stalker takes on tones of the son of Satan. The premise of the mag is Stalker's search for his soul, but after a few initial contacts with Digurth, he should look for it elsewhere. In the first issue, Paul set up a few lines of probability that show insight into future issues. These, such as Stalker's revenge game with the Baroness and his emotionlessness, combined with the overall origin plot to give the character a pleasing amount of depth, considering this was his first issue. As I see it, your greatest problem will be keeping a line of continuity through the issues and developing Stalker's world and how it ties into the rest of the DC universe. But you've given yourself a lot to work with, and though the quest-revenge plot is incredibly overused, the intricate machinations of the protagonist, antagonist and supporting characters are vivid and real enough to help carry you through. I expected much more from such names as Steve Ditko and Wallace Wood. They are capable of better, and though graced with a wonderful cover, this issue's interior art was somehow lacking. I hope we'll see better stuff soon. And that's from Stephen Perry Johnson in Virginia. He's in Virginia, so I'll have to send Ross to go and have a look for him. Editorial response to that is...
DeGirth is the primordial Satan, and Stalker's world relating to the DC universe? We doubt it. And this issue should have given you hints about exactly how this strange planet relates to the rest of the real universe, if indeed it does. And as for art, we feel that there's no better team in the business than Ditko and Wood. Each issue they do gets better and better. A subtle way of saying that we think this issue's their best yet.
Yeah, they're talking about issue 3 there. We would encourage you to get hold of the 70s run of Stalker, I think, wouldn't we, Steve?
Yeah, you can probably get it for cheap. I think I got the issues for, a total of like $15.
Yeah.
All 4 of them.
I took great delight in screenshotting the Snapchats that Steve sent me as he got them, listeners. It was very exciting. I think you got 2, 3, and 4 and then issue 1.
Yes.
Great. I was on the edge of my seat. So, yeah, the next letter goes like this.
Dear Joe, your new endeavor, Stalker, showed great promise in its first issue. Hopefully the following issues will be equally well done. Paul Levitz introduced an interesting concept in this story, the fact that Stalker is literally soulless. But strangely enough, he did display some of the baser emotions, such as anger and vengeance. And of course, I loved the Ditko Wood art. Altogether, it was a splendid story, replete with medieval sorcery and fantastic cities so essential to the mood of the story. And that is from Mark A. Sudall from Wallington, New Jersey.
Editorial response reads, naturally, he is able to display the baser emotions. Lacking a soul only bars him from feeling positive emotions. Open brackets, actually, we've never met a soulless person before, so you'll pardon us if we make up the rules as we go along. Right, awesome. The next letter goes, Dear Gang, the writing of Paul Levitz and the artwork of Steve Ditko and Wally Wood made Stalker #1 a very good origin story, and the character could be one of the most promising new heroes DC has. The story itself was perfectly timed from panel to panel, and the art was the best I have seen from the Ditko Wood team yet. Now that Steve is doing art for DC again, does this mean we might see a revival of The Creeper? And that's from John Cerrone, Bloomfield, New Jersey.
As a matter of fact, The Creeper stars in first issue special number 7, October, which will reach your newsstand about 3 weeks after this magazine. And the art is by Steve Ditko, of course.
The editorial for issue 3 continues saying, if you cast your eyes over to your left, you'll notice that this issue ends on a rather indefinite note. That's because we're now waiting for your verdict. If you and your fellow fans have made Stalker a success, we'll be back in 2 months with issue 4. And they got an issue 4. And we're now going to read the few letters from there. It's always good to look back at this stuff. The Sword and the Soul from issue 4. We get an introduction which goes like so. Remember last issue when we told you that we ended on an indefinite note to wait for your judgment at the newsstand? Well, we're still waiting, which is why this issue wraps up the first part of Stalker's story and leaves us free to begin the second chapter when the newsstand reports finally trickle in. Meanwhile, the mail has been running about 10 to 1 in favour of continuing the mag, and here's a quick sample.
Dear Joe, Paul, Steve, and Wally, thanks for showing your competitors how to produce an origin issue. The story, graphics, and general feel of the whole production was nothing short of masterful. I've been waiting for this series since I first heard the news of it through the fan grapevine, and it was worth the wait. This is the kind of magazine I buy extras of to hand out to my friends. Those comments from Jeff Long in Oak Park, Illinois.
Have you ever been to Oak Park, Illinois?
I have not. It's somewhere up north or in the Chicago area, but not been there.
Challenge extended. We need a photograph of you with this letters page in front of a sign saying welcome to Oak Park. Just when you've got time. No rush.
Hey, the other day you were reading an issue and the letters pages mentioned Urbana, Illinois. And I have been to Urbana, Illinois many times, actually.
Awesome. Right. The next letter in Stalker issue 4 reads, Dear Joe, Paul, Steve and Wally, Stalker is DC's best new title. Levitz, Ditko, Wood and Orlando are Team Supreme. Issue 2 had as much quality as the first issue and an excellent cover. Paul has got himself some great concepts to work into the story. Stalker's got a whole world to see and I'm looking forward to the future issues when he does. Steve and Wally are 2 of my all-time favourites. They give their heart, soul, no pun intended, and unbelievable skill to everything they do. Their styles are simple yet very direct. Their art is perfection. Thanks. From the bottom of my wallet and the uttermost regions of my soul. Oh, wow. That's from Jack Frost, West Monroe, Louisiana.
This one has a weird opening. It says Reading Stalker, not Dear any of these people, but Reading Stalker.
Yeah.
The 2 artists I most respect are Steve Ditko and Wally Wood. For 25 years, each man has been outstanding. Ditko's fantasy work is unsurpassed, and Wood's brand of science fiction is considered by most to be classic. So naturally, the type of story these two would most excel at would be a combination of fantasy and science fiction. Stalker seems to be predominantly fantasy, a common theme nowadays. And while the art is better than any of the competitions, I hope some science fiction will be merged into the storyline. I realize that science fiction has in the past been regarded as disastrous for sales, but it seems to me that today the trend has been reversed. Jack Kirby's Commandy, for example, is a science fiction comic that sells quite well. And Ditko and Wood are certainly capable of a skillful and refreshing blend of fantasy and science fiction. Stalker is still developing as a character in a comic, apparently in the direction of an epic. I enjoyed the 2 issues now available tremendously, and hope Ditko, Wood, and Levitz continue to produce Stalker for a long, long time. That one from Jeff Saltarella, Houston, Texas.
And the final letter that we have reads, Dear Joe, Paul, Steve and Wally, I just finished reading the first issue of Stalker and was reasonably impressed. Paul Levitt's script was very coherent and well thought out, not tasteless like some of the countless Barbarians magazines on the stands. As for the art, it's great to see Ditko and Wood back at DC. Steve and Wally's art was good, but not up to my expectations. Wood's ink seemed to be less dynamic than in the past. How about giving Wally a magazine to work on by himself? He can produce epic works in the sword and sorcery genre, open brackets. Ditko's no slouch either, close brackets. All in all, Stalker was a good comic to relax with after finishing final exams. And that's from John Freeman, Evanston, Illinois. Have you ever been to Evanston, Illinois?
I have not.
I see. Okay, well, after you go to Oak Park, nip over to Evanston, take a photograph next to the sign, blah, blah, blah. The editorial response to John Freeman's letter reads,
Interesting last line, since Paul relaxed after his finals this year by writing this issue.
And that's basically pretty much it. There's one little final paragraph here.
Just in case we're not back in 2 months, we'd like to say a short thank you to all the people who helped put Stalker together. Besides the 7 names in the credits and indicia, all of whom made this magazine possible, we'd also like to acknowledge the invaluable work of Ben Oda and Joe Lettery's letterers, Tatiana Wood, John Albano Jr., and Carl Gafford, colorists, and the entire production team, and our 100,000-plus readers whom we hope we have entertained.
Gosh. Nowadays, if a comic sold 100,000, they'd be very happy.
But not in 1975. Nope. Cancelled.
No. Oh, well. Right, listeners then. This has been Stalker in the DCU and all that sort of stuff. Interesting that some of the letters sort of speculated on how they might connect it to the main DCU. And obviously, interestingly, that has happened. Listeners, I would encourage you to seek out these issues. As Steve said, he got them all pretty cheaply. The Wonder Woman issues are a bit trickier to track down. Took me a while to get a hold of them. But they're worth reading as well. If you read the 70s series and enjoy it, I would recommend it. And also, it's very interesting looking at the new 52 version as well. I will put representations up of all of the comics that we've talked about over the socials over the next few days. On Instagram and Facebook, we are the Earth 2 Podcast. On Twitter, or X, however you want to call it, we are podcast_Earth 2. If you're feeling generous, you go to wherever it is you receive your podcasts. Leave us a review. If you're feeling even more generous, you go to our coffee page, which you can find on our link tree, and you could buy Peter the price of a beverage for him to drink while he edits Steve and I's rambling conversation. Steve, this has been good. This has been fun. I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, I did too. Thanks again for having me back, and I'm always willing if you want me again.
My absolute pleasure, treasure. I'm not sure when you'll be back. I think we've got a couple of issues of JLA that we want you to voice Batman for us at some point before too long.
Awesome.
Because obviously the 1975 JLA JSA team up is imminent, and we've got something special planned for Christmas, which we might get Steve, well, hopefully get Steve and a few other people involved in as well.
I'm in.
Awesome. On that bombshell,
I've been Steve.
I've been David. Take care. We'll see you soon on
The Earth 2 Podcast.
Transmatter cube activated. Return coordinates set for Earth Prime.
And we can see silhouetted what look like camels making their way through a blue desert. The sand maybe it's just blue because it's nighttime. I sound like Donald Trump there when I said that. Maybe it's just blue because it's nighttime.
Full circle. A week's walk has brought the young youth.
Yes, as opposed to all those old
The young youth. Ooh, all right, sorry.
Let's have that as an outtake, please, Peter.
He's a young youth, much like Adric, in Full Circle.
Yes. FS. Right.
Oh, I should have been doing a Matthew Waterhouse voice for him this whole time.
Oh, that would have been amazing. Oh well.
Oh,
because he does.
I didn't
look
even
a bit,
think.
Especially in that page, he does look a bit like Adric. He's got the beady
Yeah.
eyes. Right, should we start again from the beginning? No.
Yes. No. All right.